Hello and thanks for joining me. This is part 2 of making new dials for my Logan 820. This procedure could apply to just about any lathe, I would say. Part 1 was more specific to this lathe and possibly an Atlas or South Bend too. I don't really know. But the original dial, here's the original dial. Very small in comparison, hard to read. But this extension right here for the lead screw was real short on the original dial, and this cross slide went out across the dial itself. When you back the cross slide out like that, you couldn't even read the dial. So part 1 of this video is making this extension right here. But this video is part 2, making these dials. Something I forgot to cover in the video. This is like, they call it fill-in paint. It's a marker. Kind of reminds me of a crayon, but you wipe over the scribe lines and it makes the scribe lines turn black so you can see it a little better. I just thought I'd throw that in there because I didn't cover that in the video. But anyway, let's get on with building these dials and see what kind of damage we can do. Okay, I'm going to make my dials, or at least the first set of dials, with this 2 1/4 inch stock I have here. I faced off this surface and turned it round, cleaned it up. I'm going to chuck that in the chuck, and I've put a mark right here and a mark on my chuck. We're going to have this taken out of the chuck a couple of times while we're making the dial, and I want to make sure and get it chucked in the chuck the same way, so that everything stays concentric. No 3-jaw is totally accurate. Then I've already established what insert I'm going to use. This is a DCMT, little triangular insert, or diamond shape. Seems to work good for me. But it's important to establish what feed rate and what insert will give you the best finish, because we're going to use that to true it up after we put our engraving on the dial. So right now I'm going to turn this to make sure everything's concentric with the chuck, and then we'll proceed in making the marks on our dial. Yeah, I took off a little bit more than I planned. That's why all this stringy stuff came out of there. But as you can see, I've got a really good finish on there. That's what we want. So now we can move on to the next step. Okay, here's the secret to making dials. It's a saw blade indexing wheel. This is a 100-tooth saw blade, and I've used it before for making dials. It's divided into increments for 10s and 5s. I'm going to mount that right there. Okay, I've already made this. It's a real simple thing. That fits the saw blade. I don't remember what that is, 5/8 thread, and the threaded rod in the end of that. I put a spacer in there because I cut that undercut too far. But this goes in here, and well, probably better do it like this. Like that. Goes through your spindle and attaches inside your chuck. Made this wood piece, got a piece of like thick shim stock or something, I don't know. I don't even know where I got it. That fits over the spindle. like that. And then the blade on like that. Of course, every lathe is a little different. This is a Logan 820, and well, I had a Logan 200 when I built this. So every lathe will be a little bit different as far as how you do this. I remember how I did it last time. This is our clicker, I guess you want to call it. Okay, with everything secure, it's important that nothing moves. Just click one forward and then back. Make sure that piece of metal is seated in the... I think I'll raise that up just a little bit. There we go. We're ready to start scribing our marks now. Okay, I've got the steel back mounted in the chuck with my lines lined up. Last dials I made were made with using it like a cheap brazed carbide threading tool, and it did okay. This is steel. The last ones I did were aluminum. So I've tried various different cutters. I made this one here. I don't know how well you can see that. Thinking that a straight-sided groove would be better than the pointed one of a threading tool. But what I found was this threading tool, carbide insert threading tool, made the best groove. So I've got the height set on this already. Should be on center, and I've got the tool mounted sideways in there. That's going to be our scribing tool. So we're going to start out on the 10s, and then let's see, carriage stop. Got to have a carriage stop. Now to do this, we've got to determine how far we want that first mark on the dial. So for the 10s, you want them longer. I'm going to go with a 1/2 inch long mark. That might be a little long, maybe 5/16. So I'm going to run my tool so that it's just touching the end of the steel there. Okay, from this angle you can see what I'm talking about a little better. I've got my threading tool right there, and it's touching the end of my bar right there. Okay, I've got my carriage stop set where this tool, this little under 1/2 inch, fits right between the carriage and the stop. So the first mark I make will be that length right there. Okay, I've done a little experimenting on how deep I want to scribe that line, but I don't have any dials on my crossfeed right now, so I'm thinking it's like 10 thousandths. Hopefully I remember right. Anyway, I've got the tool up against the surface of my dial, and now I'm going to back it away and then set the depth of the scribe. Okay, this is really important, this depth, and I'm hoping I got it right. I hope that's not too deep. We're ready to make the first scribe. Pretty healthy scribe. Here's scribe 1. Let me zoom in and get a better view of that. Now I'm going to go to the next 10. Okay, I've got all the 10s scribed. Now I'm going to reset my depth stop, make it 3/8. Of course, this is just preference here. Now, we're going to make the 5s. Okay, I've reset the carriage stop to about 3/16. These are going to be my 1s. So here it goes. Okay, I just clicked past the 10. Yeah, that's the last one. Okay, in hindsight I probably should have drilled this hole first. Right now what I'm doing is getting the bore to the same diameter as this right here. That's where my dial is going to fit over the cross slide adjustment, and that's 1 inch, I believe. Okay, now I'm going to have to take a boring bar and open that up to 1 inch because I don't have a 1 inch ring. I'm going to have to invest in one. Okay, I've already made a couple of passes. I'm working blind here because I don't have any dials on my lathe here. So just take a little bit at a time and go from there. Okay, I finally got all the, I got the bore about 1/1000th over. I'm going to take some of these hairs off the dial, just so I don't cut myself on them. Okay, I didn't take anything off. I just took the burrs off the dial. Now, next step is to stamp numbers in there, and I got to take it out of the chuck to do that and put it in a jig. I still got to build the jig. And that's why you need a slow drill press. This drill press doesn't go slow enough for that size hole. Okay, what I got here is part of a stamping jig. I'm going to use it to stamp the numbers on the dial. And what I did is I drilled a hole in this steel plate and drilled it with a 1 inch bit, but it was a little tight, so I drove it in. It's pretty snug. And now I'm going to weld that right there, but I'm going to mill a slot in there to hold the punch. So when I hit the punch, it'll be perfectly lined up. But I got this is a 3/4 inch block. I need to determine how deep I want to cut that groove. Probably going to be difficult to see. It's difficult for me to see. Basically what I'm doing is making sure that number falls at the end of the line. So it looks like about flush, maybe the punch sticking up just a hair out of that when I mill the slot. I'm going 3/16 deep. I think that'll be about right. Okay, I just tack welded that right there and there. There's the track for my punch. I need to line up, I got a 1 in the punch. Need to line up the 1 with that mark right there, with one long mark. Kind of hard to see. Okay, that's lined up. What I want to do on the other side, on the opposing, one of the opposing marks, there we go. Now I can make a 1, rotate it to the next 10, punch the 2, 3, etc. Probably should cut that off right there so my hammer doesn't hit that. Okay, I cut that off. Let's see, 1, or 2 that way or 2 this way. This will be facing me, so I want to turn it clockwise. Okay, here goes. Ah, looks good. Looks good. 2. Punch fits kind of tight in there. Yeah, looks good. Three. Looking good. Okay. Put this back in the chuck aligned exactly like I had it. Make sure it's seated good. This is probably one of the more critical parts of making this dial. I could leave it like it is right now, but if I want it to really look good, I need to finish that surface. Okay, here goes. If I take too much, I wipe out the engraving. If I don't take enough, it doesn't cut smooth. Touching right there. Here we go. Boy, oh boy. I wiped it out. Wow. I don't know if you can see that or not. A lot of the ones are missing. For some reason, my depth of the scribes on the 10s and 5s were fine, but the 1s were kind of shallow. Oh boy, a lot of work for nothing. Okay, I wiped it all out. We're going to do this again. Probably do a lot of it off camera. Don't want to extend this video too long. I tried it again a few minutes ago, and the carbide threading tool chipped again. So I sharpened my own high-speed steel scribe. We'll see how that works. There's the first one. On to the next one. Hopefully that's going to work good. Okay, second time. This dial looks a little better. Let's see if I try not to mess it up. Oh, I like it. Okay, time to cut the dial off. I hope it goes good. Well, I had a little problem. My video camera battery died, and I plugged it in and started to continue with my video and tripped over the cord, and that resulted in a repair, an unexpected repair on my video camera. So I continued to make the dials, at least in part, and well, I'll show you what I did. I did some of it off camera, obviously. Okay, I remade the dials a second time. Some of that was videoed, and this is how it was in the chuck. Just like that. And I took my parting tool, cut it right there first, and then cut right there. And I scribed a line there. I just put it in the chuck and used the tool that I scribed these lines with. Scribed a line right there. That's my reference mark for my dial. Drilled a 1/4 set screw there to hold it. And on this one, I drilled a 1/4 with the 0 on the top. I got this stuff here. It's like a nylon rod that fits down in a 1/4 threaded hole, and it puts pressure on there and allows me to reset my zero without having to loosen anything. I just grab the handle and turn this. Anyway, I use the cutoff tool that I already made a video on. If you haven't seen that, be sure and check it out. It's a very good cutoff tool. I still had to take it slow on steel, but it's got a support plate that straddles the ways. But there's another video on that, be sure and watch it. Anyway, we're going to mount these dials. Okay, I've got the handle off, and need to mount this one like this. This is my reference mark. And then the dial fits right there. And this needs to be snug, not super tight. We'll adjust that further after I get the handle on here. I'm setting my backlash there. Put in my grub screw, or whatever you want to call it. This locks it to the lead screw. If you haven't seen part 1, be sure and check it out where I covered the extension. Let's be a little tighter. Oh, that's good. There's all the way back. Got the clearance for the dial now. If I can find my Allen wrench. We want to set this dial so I can see, like if I can reset it now. If I want that set to 0 right there, I just turn it. Then I can move it 90 thousandths or whatever I want to. But I like it. Let's get a good close-up of it. I'm fairly well pleased with that. Much easier to read than the original dial. Okay, I made this dial out of steel, and I'm impressed with the results, but I think if I had it to do over again, I might make it out of aluminum. The aluminum looks just as good, and it's a little easier to work with, especially on the cutoff tool, scribing lines. Learned a few things. High-speed steel works way better than the carbide for making the scribes. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for joining me, and be sure and subscribe. There is one more thing I need to mention. I got this idea for using a saw blade as an indexing wheel for making dials from Tubal Cain. He also goes by Mr. Pete 222. He's a retired shop teacher, and he's got a YouTube channel, and I highly recommend checking him out. He's got a lot to offer, especially if you're just getting started in machine work. He's a good resource, and I've learned a lot from him. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and be sure and subscribe.